Rick Grimes, the man who ended the war with the Saviors, disappeared from his family following a fatal explosion on a bridge. To his wife Michonne and brother Daryl, he was presumed dead, as a body was never found. But we all know this isn't the whole story. Today I'm going to take you through the events leading up to the disappearance of Rick Grimes in the Walking Dead TV series, to give you a little refresher before The Ones Who Live premieres next month. Just a small note, despite featuring the CRM, this is not a CR explain video, so I will not be delving into the lore here. That'll be for another video soon. It is all-out war, and Rick Grimes is approaching the Scavengers camp to recruit more allies. The world has been dead for 2.5 years at this point, so the last thing Rick would expect to see on his travels is a functioning helicopter flying right over his head, with a strange symbol painted onto the side. It will be another 1.5 years before this helicopter will become relevant again, but it is clear from the direction it came from, the Scavengers and their leader Jadis know something big that we do not. Following all-out war, the Coalition began to experience an unprecedented time of peace, as the different communities began a trade network, with the help of Rick, of course. They were more organized than ever, and to boot, had little to no deaths in the 18 months after the war. Rick Grimes had effectively begun to restart society, and we were witnessing the infancy of something great. That is, until a problem sprung up.
Houston, we have a problem.
You see, the survivors were nearing the 5-year mark of the apocalypse, and some of the surrounding old world structures had begun to collapse due to a lack of maintenance. So when a bridge connecting the trade routes for Alexandria and Hilltop falls, the Coalition begins to take on a project that will test how far they've come in the new world. You see, without the bridge, the Coalition would have to take another route to get between communities, adding up to a whole day being added to the trip in the wasteland. That may as well be a whole state over in the apocalypse. The bridge itself harkens back to Rick's broken window theory in Season 5, where if a window in a neighborhood remains broken, the surrounding area will become decrepit. Signs of disorder encourage further acts of disorder, and the same logic could apply to their fragile way of life. So the bridge is basically a physical depiction of this metaphor for Rick. If the bridge remains broken, the Coalition will fall without the ability to reach each other. So Ricky Dicky Doodah begins a new project, rebuilding the bridge. But with all these important projects already in the works, who has the time or the manpower to dedicate to the bridge? Enter the Saviors. You see, immediately after the war, Rick had taken control of the sanctuary and anointed Daryl as leader of the failing settlement. Being a factory, it was nearly impossible for crops to grow, hence why Negan needed people to produce for him in the first place. The ex-Saviors even tried stringing up walkers as scarecrows, which Daryl disapproves of. Which is kind of dumb because this seems kind of genius to me. While Negan may be gone, the desire for his leadership remained alive in the sanctuary, with multiple instances of graffiti and disorderly conduct within the factory. But Daryl knew they didn't want Negan, they wanted food. So when Rick approaches the Hilltop's newly elected leader Maggie with an offer to use the Saviors as labor in exchange for food and supplies, she agrees, as they will both benefit from the arrangement. That same night, Maggie is attacked by a man manipulated by the Hilltop's former jealous leader Gregory, but walks away with minor injuries. Despite Rick's no-killing movement, Maggie hangs Gregory publicly. While no immediate consequences come from this act, many among the Coalition were watching and respected Maggie's decision. So work begins on the new project, using the Saviors as labor and support from the Kingdom and Oceanside, while Rick and his band of leaders monitor the construction. Jadis, the ex-leader of the Scavengers, volunteers to be a part of the project, and although her history with the Coalition is sketchy at best, she has proven to be an asset to the project. Rick even takes the time to gloat to the imprisoned Negan about the progress they've made working together in the new world without him.
You're not saving the world, Ray. You're just getting it ready for me.
Many precautions were put in place to avoid any accidents at the bridge, such as horde spotters dedicated to steering herds away from the build sites. The setup would have been foolproof if they didn't have a savior named Justin on horde patrol. You see, when the time came to sound the alarm, Justin had abandoned his post, leading to the lumber crew getting overrun, and Aaron injuring his arm, leading to amputation. This colossal fuck-up begins to sow animosity between the Saviors and the Coalition members. Animosity that will result in Saviors disappearing from the worksite over the next few days. Rick had made a deal to protect the Saviors in exchange for work, and with their men going missing one by one, Officer Friendly had broken his promise. It's funny how we see nothing has really changed since Negan was defeated. Hilltop still gives the Saviors copious amounts of food, and the act of using people for work in exchange for protection still lives on. The next morning, Justin, the Savior who messed up the Horde deterrent, is found turned with a bolt-shaped hole in his chest. Rick's cop instincts kick in as he begins to question the disgruntled Daryl. He denies having anything to do with it, but wishes he did, as he, like many others, don't agree with Rick taking in the Saviors and keeping Negan alive. Rick believes him, so the search for the real killer continues. The Saviors are beginning to feel unsafe and becoming restless. Accusations are thrown from all sides, some believing Jadis is the culprit, which Rick is also suspicious of. He asks Gabriel to keep an eye on her, as the two have been getting rather close the last month or so, but as we see later that night, Jadis hasn't ceased contact with these mysterious helicopter people, as they are seen surveying the area late at night, confirming to us, the audience, she is still a bad apple. Now, Maggie has not been happy with the Savior's performance with the bridge, and thinks the surplus of food is going to waste, with such a large number of Saviors walking off the project. And on top of that, another Savior has gone missing, leading Rick to fear if they are not found, the entire workforce will leave, and with them, the Coalition itself. So when Maggie and Daryl do some investigating late at night, they come across the residents of Oceanside in the process of an execution. You see, years before the war, Oceanside was a bustling community of both men and women, but when Negan's Lieutenant Simon arrived and had the Saviors kill every man in the village, the Oceanside women were left powerless with no weapons and crushed spirits. So when Rick arrested Negan at the end of the war, the Oceanside women went along with his plan, as they believed his new rules would bring justice. But that never happened. As we discussed earlier, not much really changed since the war, with the Saviors still taking copious amounts of supplies. So Oceanside's faith in Rick begins to fade. When Maggie hung Gregory, they came to understand that Rick's rules weren't the only rules, and took justice into their own hands, killing Saviors one by one at the bridge camp. Maggie and Daryl try to talk Oceanside down, but when Cindy reveals the horrible way the Savior Arat killed her younger brother in front of her, and said those traumatizing words,
"No exceptions."
No exceptions!
Daryl and Maggie turn a blind eye on the pleading Arat, and Oceanside gets their last bit of justice. And just as Rick predicted, the rest of the workforce leaves the project. Negan has been on Maggie's mind obsessively since the war, and the time for Maggie's idea of justice has come. It is time for Negan to die at all costs. And right by her side is Daryl, ready to make his move on Rick. Now, as we know, Gabriel was tasked to keep an eye on Jadis for Rick, due to her sketchy nature. When Gabe follows Jadis to her old base, he begins to hear something strange. Here's where things get interesting. Jadis speaks into a walkie-talkie where she claims she needs an evacuation. In response, a man on the radio tells her she's gonna need an A to make that happen. Unfortunately for Jadis, Gabriel confronts her on what he heard, and Jadis admits she has been trading human beings to these helicopter people in exchange for food and supplies. She begs Gabriel to come with her, as there is a place that is safe that they can live together at. But Gabriel is far from his cowardly days and refuses to leave with her due to his loyalty for Rick. Clearly disappointed, Jadis says,
"And all this time, I thought you were a bee."
and knocks Gabriel out. Waking up the next morning, Gabriel is alone, and Jadis has disappeared from the Coalition forever. Gabriel will never tell anyone about what happened to Jadis, but if he did, it could have led to some answers on what is about to occur. Without the Savior's labor, work on the bridge project has come to a halt as Rick struggles to keep the remaining workers together. But little does he know, a coup has been forming since Maggie's declaration to kill Negan. Oceanside's loyalty now lies with Maggie over Rick, and the time to kill Negan has come. Jesus pleads to Maggie not to kill Negan, as the messaging now would be all wrong. But Maggie is bloodthirsty and ready, and on the road to Alexandria, practices what she's gonna do to Negan on a walker. Word gets to Rick that Maggie is at Alexandria's gates, and he knows exactly what that means, as she couldn't bear to enter the safe zone while Negan lived. Panic sets over as Rick knows if Negan dies, their new laws begin to fall apart. He sends a relay message to Maggie that he just wants to talk and not to do anything rash. But Oceanside is all about revenge and tampers with the relay.
I think she's done talking.
Daryl offers Rick a ride on his motorcycle as it will be faster, but Daryl takes off on the opposite direction. Rick knows Daryl's compromised and demands he stop the bike. He begs Daryl not to let this happen, but Daryl is done listening. He lets him know his message didn't get to Alexandria, and to stop Rick from calling it in himself, Daryl begins to wrestle the walkie out of his hands, leading to the two getting stuck in a pit. Here, Rick tells Daryl what everyone already knows. But Daryl tells him the truth. The Saviors being a part of the Coalition just isn't meant to be, and a lot of people are getting hurt trying to chase a dream. The two reconcile as Daryl helps Rick move on from the death of his son. It's a really touching moment, that is, until a mass gunfight can be heard coming from the camp. You see, the Saviors who were a part of the labor force figured out that Oceanside were the ones killing them. Declaring war, they have come back for the weapons stashed at the camp. Obviously, this went as well as expected, and Rick is now fighting with everything he has to get back to the camp. The two make it out of the pit just to be greeted by a horde being drawn from the gunfire. Without the additional labor from the Saviors, the Coalition didn't have enough people to spot herds, making this entire area extremely unsafe. From the woods, a pale horse emerges, trying to get away from the horde itself. Rick hops on and tells Daryl he needs to lead the horde away, or it will plow through Hilltop. The two separate as Daryl heads back to help the camp, as Rick marches with the dead. Back at Alexandria, Maggie is inside the walls and is ready to finish what Rick should have 18 months ago. Michonne stops her at the door of his cell and begs Maggie not to kill Negan, as it will break apart the foundation of what they've been building. But Maggie knows Negan would have been dead a long time ago if that was Rick, and Michonne agrees, allowing her to do what she has to do to find peace. When face to face with the man who murdered her husband, Negan taunts her about his death, egging her on to put him down. But as he goes on, he begins to break down, revealing he actually wants death and can't bear to live this way. In that moment, Maggie finally understands why Rick did what he did, realizing that for a person like Negan, incarceration is actually a worse fate than death. And like that, Maggie is able to come to peace with Negan living and chooses not to kill him. It's a shame Maggie leaves after this episode because we see how much Michonne respected her for not killing Negan. It's pretty disappointing that after the next time jump, they have the two at odds and distant with each other. The ordeal mirrors their comic ending and puts their conflict to a
Son of a bitch.
It really is the perfect ending for their conflict, and it's crazy Rick never actually finds out the outcome. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Officer Friendly soon finds himself at a crossroads where a second horde has intercepted them. Panicking, his horse bucks him off, plunging him straight onto a piece of rebar. Rick writhes in pain as the hordes begin to close in, but he is a survivalist and has the quick thinking to use his belt to elevate himself off just in time. Rick, now bleeding out, mounts his horse once again and sets off to finish what he started. The next hour is the hardest time of his life. Barely clinging to life the whole time, Rick falls in and out of consciousness, hallucinating his lost friends along the way. Shane gives him the strength to finish the mission. Herschel gives him forgiveness for his failures, and Sasha gives him acceptance for what he needs to do to end this. A lot of people say he should have hallucinated Carl or Lori or someone here, but I think that would have defeated the point of the whole "I'm looking for my family" thing. If we saw Carl, some could interpret that as him finding his family and giving in to death, but with the chosen characters he hallucinates, it reinforces that he fights for the living being Michonne and Judith. Finally arriving at the bridge camp, Rick is terrified to see Saviors and Coalition members alike dead and turned. He knows things are broken and understands there is only one way to fix it, by destroying the thing they've been working on to keep them connected. He is willing to sacrifice the unity of the Coalition for their lives and begins marching down the bridge, Horde in tow. But the bridge holds. Turns out, they were stronger with the Saviors a part of them. They succeeded in mending the bridge to keep everyone connected. Arriving in his final moments, Daryl, Michonne, Maggie, and many others watch as Rick points his iconic revolver down the bridge at a box of dynamite used for construction and utters his famous final words.
I found
The Coalition watches in terror as Rick blows himself up along with the Horde and the bridge. Bringing down the threat and sacrificing his life, Rick Grimes saved them. The Horde marches into the rushing water below as Michonne screams in horror. And watching from afar, Daryl sheds a single tear before disappearing into the woods. Rick Grimes is gone, and the Coalition will never be the same without their leader. Wait, what's this? We see as Jadis watches the smoke bellow from the bridge from afar, as the helicopter that's been circling the area descends. It seems like Jadis is about to hijack the helicopter when she begins to see movement from the river. Among the hundreds of burnt bodies, we see Rick Grimes, still clinging on to life after everything. Jadis begs the helicopter to help her friend, in which they oblige. Rick has survived the bridge and disappears from the Coalition for what will be over an entire decade. Presumed dead by his friends and family, but not forgotten by any sense. Daryl will spend the next 6 years scanning the river for a body, but will only come up with his iconic revolver in the search. Michonne will never be the same again, pulling back from their allied communities and isolating Alexandria. She lost the love of her life, and now has to raise not only his daughter, but their shared son, as she was pregnant before his disappearance. The bridge falling didn't make the Coalition fall apart and become separate. It was Rick's absence. The hole left behind by Rick will have a direct effect on everyone who was there for the war, and Negan will be left alive indefinitely out of respect for their fallen leader. So, where did Rick fly off to? Where is he? Why hasn't he returned? Well, that will have to be a story for another day.
We're the ones who live.